Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Jerry Sipp. I'm the Artistic Director of the Justice Theater Project. And on behalf of all of our staff and all of our board members, we are so excited that you're here for our final film of this crazy year in our June musical, Finding My Voice, with the incomparable Lee Galbraith. And I saw at the end that everyone stood up and applauded for you, and I'm going to do the same. I'm only going to do it like this, though, because of my COVID belly. I don't want you to see. Welcome. It's so nice to have you here, and I can't wait to talk to you about the creation of this beautiful piece, and especially with your cohort back there behind you.
I know, for moral support.
So I was actually, I'm sure everyone in the audience noticed that was watching tonight, noticed that I was in the front row of your performance for this show. So I got the wonderful privilege of seeing it live in 2013. That's a while ago. And so it's been several years since you revisited this piece, since you wrote it, you lived it, you performed it. And so what's that experience been like to revisit it after, all this time away? And, have there been things and feelings that come up that have surprised you as you went back and delved back into this piece?
Yeah, it's been really a wild experience, because at first it was more just well, let's just make sure. I don't know. I don't even remember how good was the video. Let's just and then once I had agreed to do it and realized that I was going to need to actually be able to talk about it, I had to remind myself of all of that journey, and that was a really kind of crazy journey for me personally. Obviously, from the inception to the logistics, which I was kind of completely responsible for, to actually performing it. So it has brought up a lot of emotions. I've had when I watch it, I tend to feel like a parent who's like mouthing along with their kid, like, you can do, okay, it's a little flat, but the next, oh, that was pretty, like I'm really engaged. I find myself to be engaged physically, because it's so much, I don't remember the words line by line, but I remember the emotion behind it all. So, and the songs particularly are the places where I just really I know the challenges that were there. So watching it for me is a very emotional experience, and I keep finding myself really being affected by it, which is wonderful, and it's kind of surprising that after all of this. But on a whole nother level, one of my concerns concerns when we spoke about this at first was just thinking that the world has changed, so much since 2013. We've had pandemics and political upheaval we could never have imagined, and we've had Me Too and Black Lives Matter. And I just thought, is this a story that really needs to be told right now, that people will really resonate with? And I actually have really come to believe that it is, and that it's kind of a universal story. I've been reading a lot of memoir type books that are very popular right now. Untamed by Glennon Doyle and Broken by Jenny Lawson, and all of Ali Brosh's books. And I keep finding things. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's in my show. And these are books that are on the New York Times bestseller right now. So I think there's something universal about it. It doesn't have to be everyone's story, but it's definitely the kind of story that is universally appealing and applicable and resonates. At least I think so. At least I feel that it is so.
Yeah, I mean, I would not consider myself an expert on memoir, but I think that's one of the beauties of that form, is that in telling your own personal story, you are often speaking just your truth, and then people will then extrapolate their truths from it, and then start saying, well, this is not exactly my experience, but I've experienced something similar to that, and I know what that feels like, and feels crappy or wonderful or confusing, or all of those emotions that you addressed so beautifully in the piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what I was hoping for, that by being very specific, I would be very, universal in some ways, because I think if I tried to write something that was telling everybody's story, it would have just ended up being platitudes, and it wouldn't have had those moments of resonance. So I just really tried to dig into my own experience and be as honest and nuanced about that as I could be. But of course, even within my own experience, we're now years down the road, and I look back and I go, oh, well, the story could be told in a different way. So there's never a perfect expression of the truth, but I was really going for that. So.
Well, it's a moment in time for you too. I think that, again, you're looking back on it now, from a different lead, and, you're essentially the same, but you've journeyed quite a bit from there. And so I think the fact that it was of a time and era in your life doesn't change those truths, because they're, like you say, they've only been highlighted or emphasized in our modern world. That's so modern compared to 2013 when we didn't know anything.
Well, but I look at that person up there and I'm thinking, I don't think I knew, I don't think I was using the patriarchy or white privilege. Those are major concepts that I don't think I even understood. And so it really is, I am coming from a whole different point of view. And I see myself sort of tap dancing around some very important sort of social justice issues with body shaming and the way that we tie our young women into knots about sexuality versus virtue, what that all means and how that's a catch-22 situation. And I have been working through the past couple of years to educate myself on some of those issues. So now I have language that at the time I didn't have at all, So it really is a different me in a really kind of remarkable way. I've been like, oh yeah, wow, I couldn't have articulated that back then. So not to say that it's not there. A little bit of it is there, but.
Well, I do think there's value in us looking back and saying, all the signs were there. I knew what that was back then, but I didn't have a word for it. I didn't have a name for it. And as we evolve, hopefully over time, we go, oh yes, now I know what that's called. It's called this, and it wasn't any more right back then than it is today. And we just didn't. Our society was not wakened up enough to realize it.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, I knew something was wrong and that I'd been impacted by something systemically. I knew that people looked at my body in a certain way, and I knew that as a woman in the arts, there were some fewer opportunities than there might have been if I hadn't been. But I didn't know how to name those things. But on the other hand, I also wasn't thinking about, how much more difficult it would have been if I was a person of color, or how much more difficult it would have been if I was someone who had a gender that was non-binary. So those are things that, I'm still trying to really, fill myself up on, because I'm not, don't mean to speak to it with any kind of expertise, but I'm trying to learn. But at that time I was very ignorant of those issues. So they're not really addressed. On the other hand, if I had set out to preach to those, I think now I'd be like, oh my gosh, oh my God, oh why? Oh no, don't shut up. So I'm kind of glad I didn't try.
Well, it's true. I mean, as soon as you start, being the foremost authority on whatever you're speaking of, then generally, people do feel preached to, and they back away. So I think that there's a simplicity there's a complexity in the simplicity of what you said. You're saying this is what it meant to me, and everyone else can extrapolate from that.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely.
And, I mean, it's curious to me, after, you were really kind of silent for years as a performer and a singer, and then you came back really with this wasn't your first thing that you came back with. Obviously, you came back with Princess Ida and things, but you were very, very honest, very, very open, very almost raw in your honesty about your journey towards this, and I'm just curious about that process, and you allude to it somewhat in the piece, but I wonder if you can give us a little more depth in this idea of not only just wanting to come back and sing again, but to be able to tell why you couldn't sing again. Your whole life experience had led to this in such a really grand and a really personal manner.
I think, well, so the Princess Ida was the first performing that I'd done really in North Carolina. And that was in 2011. And then right after that, I had this idea, and I think it was, I'm someone who really likes, that's the right word, things that are, words escaping me. But anyway, I had done a 30th birthday, and then I knew my 40th was coming up, and so I needed a deadline. Like, it gave me a hard deadline when I committed to sort of the beauty of, oh, I should do one of these every 10 years sort of thing. Then I all of a sudden I had a deadline coming up, and so I took a couple classes right away after Princess Ida with the Creativity School, which I'm not sure if is still in existence in that form, but that's Tamara Kassain and Sherry Shem. You know who I'm talking about. Cheryl Shambly. And I mean, they were basically just like helping me with some of those very early concepts. I knew it was going to have monologues. I knew it was going to be songs. I knew I wanted it to be a theatrical piece, but I didn't know what it was going to be about. And then I signed on with them as creativity coaches to do the early work for sort of like laying in all of the logistical groundwork. And they were so helpful. And they also gave me lots of assignments to generate ideas towards what this could be, where it could go. So I had a really long process of just trying to figure out what the show was going to be. I think if I had started and I had said, I'm going to do a show where I show pictures of my half naked body, and I tell all these stories about my history and everything, I think I probably would have been just like too scared to get there. And so it's really this like long, slow process of figuring out what I want to say and figuring out what it's going to look like. And it took years. It took 2 solid years, and working with them, and then with Jay Chichula, who ended up directing in the last couple months of the project, and obviously with Glenn Meerbach, who is an amazing musician. So I think the only reason that I was able to do it in the format that you saw was because it wasn't an instant thing. It was a slow build, and it was mine. I got to own it, and I got to do it the way I wanted it to do it. And I got to make all this. I had to make all the decisions. Sometimes I didn't want to make all the decisions, but I got to really like focus in on the things that make me look good and made me feel safe and made it possible to do something that was kind of out there. So yeah, there's not like, I mean, healing is boring, right? Healing is just taking time and having some positive reinforcement and everything. It's all the stuff about being broken that's really the dramatic, interesting stuff. So I do apologize. It does tend to dominate the show because it's just hard to articulate how you start to feel better. And I also have really supportive family and my husband and you and people that I knew who were definitely encouraging all the way along.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, of course, we're going to June 7th, if you want to continue this dialogue and continue to learn more about this journey, and maybe you want to embark on your own journey of telling your own story, we will be having another session with Tamara and Cheryl about and you to talk about the evolutionary process of this, and how it happened, how it went along, and dissecting the inspiration and the motivation and the discipline that it took to create this piece, and how someone else could do it to tell their story. Because really, as one of our missions is to give people a voice, whatever that is, whatever voice they need, whatever they need to talk about, and this might give somebody else an insight to tell their story that makes a difference in someone else's life.
Absolutely. I mean, that will be a wonderful discussion. They are fantastic and incredibly knowledgeable people. I will say that there are a lot of obstacles to putting up a one-person show, financial obstacles, just life happens, someone I knew had surgery in the middle of all of this. And then there was, so work, and it's, that's another thing that's been really interesting about watching the show out of time is you're going, oh, that's right. Oh, wait, I mean, the show is one thing, but there's all of, like, to put all of that together and to remind yourself, it really is a lot. And I honor anybody who's trying to do creative work in the middle of life, which all of us are. So it can be really challenging, for a lot of different people, especially the people who need to tell their stories the most sometimes.
Yeah. I've never done a memoir piece, but I have done a number of one-person performances, and started from scratch with nothing and had an idea and worked along with for years. Battled with myself, sometimes spending months or close to a year in reference libraries because there was no internet when I was trying to research the kind of shows that I was doing. And it really does take you on a fascinating journey, and there are so many opportunities to quit. We're just so glad you didn't quit on this, because there's a billion obstacles that get in your way, and it really speaks to and one thing I wanted to talk to you about, as you mentioned that I supported you through this, but I try to support you through life, because by the way, for those of you, full disclosure, for those of you who don't know, the Dan that you see in the hugs and stuff in this piece is Dan Sip, and so Lee is actually, she doesn't like to admit it, but she's related to me in some way because she is my sister-in-law. But this is more that we got to talk to each other than my daughter's wedding in the last year and a half, probably.
True.
Yeah,
it's true.
It's there. We live, we live relatively close together, and you're an incredibly busy person. I'm an incredibly busy person, and my brother's an incredibly busy person, and it's ridiculous how little we get to spend time. So this will be one of my finest hours with you in quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely, fantastic.
But one of the things I wanted to bring up was the idea that I have known you for a long time now, and I remember vividly the song at your wedding on 10-10-10, and just hearing your beautiful voice then. We didn't get much chance to hear you sing, but we always knew that you were an amazing singer. But I really didn't know until I saw finding my voice that you struggle with all these insecurities. I did not know all the main parts of your life story that intensely. I learned as much as everyone else when I was sitting in the front row of that audience. And what really struck me was I've also seen every performance you've ever done since then, live and enthusiastically, because I'm just a big fan. And you come across on stage as supremely confident. And I don't think anyone that has ever seen you that doesn't know you, or even people like me that reckon that they know you fairly well, would have ever guessed that you struggle with the insecurities that you do, that you talk about so eloquently in your piece. And I just wonder, I would probably be living in Madagascar if I had, to deal with the obstacles that you have, fighting on the inside. That sandpaper you talk about
Yeah.
on the inside of your skin and stuff. How are you able to overcome that and still, own that confidence? Because it can't be faked. I mean, I remember that, George Burns once said, not famously, that the most important thing in acting is honesty. And if you can fake that, you got it made. And I think the same thing about confidence. I mean, you can't fake it. Somehow you're finding an inner confidence that's trumping, I hate that word, but overcoming the insecurities. How do you do it?
Yeah. Well, it's that old joke about how do you get to Carnegie Hall, right? Practice, practice, practice. I honestly, it's like being over prepared is the only way for me to feel prepared, because I know that as soon as I get into a stressful situation, I'm going to lose Cheryl's name. Like, how does that happen? But my brain sort of has just, and it's not completely uncommon. I mean, if you're flooded with stress hormones, fight or flight, if you're in a scary situation, you're going to forget things. People have lots of people have problems with speaking in public, and that's a very common fear. But here I am, someone who's supposed to be prepared, like supposed to have done this enough that it's not really that scary anymore, and has had experience and acclaim to some minor degree, and so it should be easy. It shouldn't take up like my entire day to get ready for this interview, right? But to some extent, that is what I spent my day doing, because I wanted to make sure that I had opened up the brain space, thought through some things, because I wouldn't just be able to sit here and be comfortable and have like a natural conversation with you if I hadn't done that. So it just takes more resources. It's not that I can't do it. And sometimes unfortunately, I don't do it flawlessly, even when I put all the resources into it. And if you're going to be singing it, not that it ever got close, but let's just say I was going to be singing at the Met, you have to be flawless. People are going to know if you drop any tiny little problem, if you get, and so I have all kinds of sort of coping mechanisms to like try to trip myself up ahead of time so that I can, I'm sure, I know that you work with memory work, and so I'm sure you know a lot of these tricks yourself, but I'll just have Dan just shout out a line in the middle of something, or something that's just a random something, and see if you can pick up from there. And there's lots and lots of hard work and tricks like that kind of prepare you. But the honest truth is not that it keeps me from doing anything. It's just that in order to do things at the level that I kind of like to be able to do them, I just have to work much harder than the average bear, So my report cards always, when I was a kid, I found them before I wrote this show, and they all say, Lee works very slowly. And I think if I'd been tested, there might have been some sort of processing delay diagnosed, but because I still am a very, very slow reader. Like in college, I averaged it out and I could read 10 pages an hour, which is not a lot. I'm still an incredibly slow reader. So I think that there probably is something physiologically a little bit wonky there, but my grades were always good enough. I was always working hard enough. I was a valedictorian in my little class, so nobody bothered to test me out. I was in a gifted program for grade school. So it's possible to overcome those things if you just work really hard, I guess. That's how I do it. The ear part is a problem because I can't really fix that. And when I get really nervous, it's almost like I'm completely incapable to remember what the tune of my song is. And that's scary. That's really scary to be standing backstage and be like, I've got to go sing an aria, which I practiced 1,000 times. Oh, I can't remember it at all. That's a really scary situation to be in. But
yeah, well, I think to me, in doing Finding My Voice, you were you. I mean, there were times certainly where you were delving into a character as you were singing, as opposed to say something where you're doing with the Savoyards, where you're actually playing the character. To me, it would be much more difficult for me because I am, I'm an actor, and for me, hiding behind a character is exactly what I want to do. I do not want to be out there as myself, and I'm much more nervous. I'm preparing for talking with you today, half the day trying to make sure that I come across all right, because I'm much more confident and comfortable being somebody else than I am in front of an audience than I am being myself. So I would think that would be more difficult. Was it for you more difficult, or is it more difficult for you to play a role?
Well, I think that it wasn't the clearing the artifice off was the hard part for me. And I worked with Jay Chichula to direct as a sort of a coach and director there at the end. And that was his big push, was to just take everything that you're putting between you and the audience away. And I didn't think I was trying to create a character. And when I do create a character, I think I'm a little ham-fisted with it. I don't think I've got the nuance of acting that you have. So, but I thought I was being me, but just in the sort of the larger theatrical version. And we had to work quite a bit to kind of to tone that down, to tame that down, just to so that there wasn't any sort of wall put up between me and the audience, which is super scary. You've done theater in very small theater in the Round. I think Tuesday with Maury was in, right? Wasn't that in the Round, sort of?
Yes, there were times when people would put their programs down on the furniture that we were using, and I'd be sitting at a desk and someone's foot would be touching my foot at times during that performance. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's terrifying, because you look at somebody and that's enough distraction. I mean, you do want to look at somebody like that. If you can do that, if you can sing an aria and be communicating eye to eye with the people who are 2 feet away from you, then you're doing a very good job. Like, that's how opera should be, and that's how singing and art should be. But that's scary, and it's really hard. So I think I was able to successfully do that to some degree in that small space, but it definitely was it was a little extra fear inducing when you're on a stage and there's just a black void out there. It's not nearly so upsetting.
I agree with you. You bring up that experience with Tuesdays with Maury, and I think, and Andy Hayworth, our director of that show, was just like, yeah, I want you to look right into people's eyes. And I have never done that in my acting career, just talk to a person that was sitting in the audience and actually address them, because I always thought, oh, that's gonna make them feel weird. It definitely makes me feel weird, and I'm to look above their heads and speak that way. And so that was a new experience for me. And but I agree with you and with Jay's instinct on this, is that the personal, because I was there, I was in the front row, and at times that puppet back there was rubbing my face and things like that. That was essential for that piece, and I think that comes across in this video. One of the things I'm so happy about as this being our final piece, which I only thought about after we okay. Well, we were having a discussion for a little time blip there from Thanos clicking his fingers or something. that we were just talking about just I'm glad that we're doing this piece at the end of the season, because you can feel the audience again, and how they responded to you, and I can't wait live theater back in October with Jay Chichula directing again, our first piece of the season. Yes.
That's
So
such a perfect
what goes
segue.
around comes around.
Yeah, well, I was taught about that kind of direct audience interaction in Chicago by my teacher, Winifred Brown, because we did a lot of these sort of best of opera like concerts in churches. And so there were no house lights, it was like there were people right in your face and everyone was all the same level of light and everything. And so, yeah, that was a really special and extremely scary type of situation to be in, but it is wonderful to have the audience feel with this show. I even feel it, like I'm like, oh, that's right, they laughed. Oh, like it's wonderful to know that everybody's in it together.
Yeah, this, the piece is so funny, and and it's hard to imagine that when you're talking about so many, just deeply rooted, things that were so hard for you. But you do bring out the humor in that, without pushing it. It's just because of the honesty and the realism of what you're saying, and the way that we know that at least for now you've overcome that enough to be here and tell us about it, gives us some joy, and that's where I think a lot of the humor comes from.
Yeah.
The way I experienced it.
Yeah, and we're human beings who have embarrassing and funny things that happen to us. So when we hear about other people's embarrassing and funny things, we get it. Like we resonate with that humor too, as well as the pain.
Yeah. So you've already mentioned a lot of the folks that have helped you along this journey. It's totally your piece. I mean, this is yours from beginning to end. You own it, and there would be no piece without you. But I know that a lot of folks. I mean, theater is a collaborative art form. Even when we think a one-person show, that means it was one person. But I'm just interested to know about other people, even if they weren't directly involved, who encouraged you, who helped you along the way to get this piece out into the world, because I'm so happy it's here.
Yeah, well, there were a couple other artists that were actually sort of tangentially involved. The photos were taken by someone who you know well, J.C. Blakely. Arden, I think is her professional name. And she did just such a beautiful, wonderful job. We just did that photo shoot was done in our sunroom. And the whole point was just to be as simple as possible. So I hopped out of the shower with wet hair and came down, and we just had a big piece of black velveteen that I had in the closet as our backdrop. And and Dan was very sweet and allowed himself to be body in the photo shoot, but she did just a beautiful work, and it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be, like I had this concept and then the pictures didn't necessarily 100% match up, but they because of what they were, we were able to use them in the Always Do the Changing so wonderfully. They spoke to the whole aging couple, things in a way that my idea would never have. So that was a way that another artist's work really informed the piece. The puppet was made by Tarish Pipkin, who is a amazing puppeteer and designer. And my one hugest regret about the whole show is that I got her not long enough ahead of the show for me to get really good with her. So we did some stuff, but I am not a great puppeteer yet. So that is the one thing that I wish I would have been able to do. But I mean, her batteries are dead, but her eyes glowed and like all kinds of cool stuff. So that was really fun. So that was something that, like, once you have the puppet in front of you and then you get to like really imagine what that's going to be like, and it informs that moment so much. And let me see, well, obviously all of the friends and family who just gave me lots of emotional support and heard, like, for years I would be like, so I've got this idea, you know. And Dan really bore the brunt of that, you know, and he tried, I think, very hard to be neutral, because if he thought one idea was the best idea I ever heard, and then I turned around and said, oh no, I've scrapped that idea and I've got a better idea, then, you know, like, so he just was supportive in general, but he heard a lot of like, oh, I've got this new idea, it's amazing, you know. So yeah, I'm trying to think. My parents deserve a huge amount of it. You're like, she'll get there. They deserve a huge thank you, because they're the ones who edited the video, which obviously, since it was done then, we didn't know it was going to be used this way. So it's just really the best video that could be created from the takes. And we did nothing to make it easy for them. Like, you know, there's air conditioners and there's audience noise and all this stuff. And so the version that you see is the very best that can be put together based on the film that we were able to get from two live performances edited together. So, and I know that it's been maybe tweaked. I don't know if we need to speak to that, but there was some processing that needed to be done for the streaming, and so I appreciate any of that happened.
Well, you know, again, this is using 2013 technology, where you think it's not that far, but where technology has come from there, it's just been we're going to keep trying. We're going to keep trying. We're going to see if we can find some more brilliance here. But anyway. I did want to ask you about the music that you chose. I know that was an integral part of the piece. It was an amazing part of the piece, and I actually listened to your interview on WHUP. Those folks are so wonderful to support all the arts in the Triangle, and I heard some really cool things about how the music came to be, and how even people thought that you were writing all the music, even though you're featuring some great classic music and some brilliant artists who wrote the music. Tell me a little bit about that.
Right. So the funny thing about that story is that this process for writing the show was so long, but the music was basically chosen instantaneously. It was like the first thing that I did was just sort of sit down and be like, yeah, I want to sing blah, 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 blah. And that was it. And basically the list hardly ever changed. There was one piece in German that I took out, and a few others that I kind of thought about adding but never really did. I had done a 30th and birthday recital, which I paced really poorly, and I did all the easy stuff at the beginning, and I did all the hardest, like most amazing stuff at the end, and I didn't have the chops left to do it. So this time I was like, I am going to just make sure that I am a little on the conservative side with the amount of music that I put into this thing. So, but the songs basically were set from the very beginning. And then of course, and that was before I even knew what the show was going to be about. So then you have to like find a way to make it all become cohesive, and it was just so tickled because I did have people ask me, did you write those songs? They're just so perfect. And three of them are from moderately famous American operas. There's a couple art songs that people wouldn't know unless they'd happen to stumble across them. The Bare to the Bone is by a folk singer, Carrie Newcomer, who was very popular in my neck of the woods. And then Total Praise is like a classic gospel song. So I didn't write any of them, but I was able to find a really wonderful way to make it all make sense. And I really just loved that people felt that it just felt so cohesive and like it was meant to be that way. And I think anything that's a great piece of art, you're like, well, obviously it was going to be that way. It's so obvious. And of course, you toil and you toil and you toil to get to that place. But that's how you know that you kind of landed where it needed to be, because it just seems so right. It's so obviously natural feeling at the end. And so that was really happy for me when people ask me those kinds of questions.
I wanted to share with our viewers and our patrons here the story of how the idea of bringing this piece back to life came to be. We went from a live theater company to thinking, okay, how are we going to replace 6 live theater shows in a time when you can't have live theater? So we began to, we knew we couldn't do a lot of, plays that were, that we could just film because we couldn't get the rights to those plays to film them because of copyright laws. Then we decided we need to do all original theater. And I started mining my years in theater of, who do I know that does original pieces? What original pieces are around? What pieces are around but haven't been made into something yet that people have already seen? And I was discussing this with my mother one day, and she told me, well, you should just do Lee's piece. You should just do Lee's piece. She made a video on that, but just do that one. And I was like, well, I agree with you. That was one of the most brilliant pieces and engaging pieces I've seen in a long time. But we're a social justice theater, and we do social justice, theater work. And so, I'm not sure it's appropriate. And she went, you're out of your mind. What about this issue? 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 And I went, you are 100% correct. And I was probably on the phone to you within an hour of that conversation. Boy, was she right. But so what I wanted to ask you about was, it is an intensely personal story, and it really is your piece. And we touched on this earlier, but I do think now that I've been enlightened and smacked across the head, that it has so many social justice issues that we talk about all the time in our theater work and our social justice work here at JVP. So what issues, really hit home for you and as you look back on it?
Yeah, well, I kind of touched on that a little bit before, in that when I was creating the piece, the things that were the themes in my head were more around identity, loss of identity, grieving an identity, like what happens when your dreams fail and how do you get over that, and what's life look like from that. How do you know whether you're a success? How do you know, that was sort of the stuff I was chewing on, or it wasn't. And so the things that are in there are things that were just things that didn't seem right, or, well, I'm not sure if didn't seem right is even the right word, but they were experiences that I had that did not seem, or that felt noteworthy, that felt like they lent themselves to that story. And I am glad that I didn't try to make it a social justice piece, because knowing myself, it would have been a very heavy-handed attempt, but by simply sticking to the facts and sticking to my own experiences, I think I have touched on weight is obviously, like, body shaming, weight bias is obviously something that is some part of my experience and has been through for a long time. I think that the ways that we are unfair to young women about sex is, I don't know that I can really, it's complicated because I've been conditioned, but we've definitely conditioned a whole generations of women to be screwed up about sex, and that is not right. And so that's in there, but it's not, I don't offer any answer to that question. And then of course there's, when you open up the idea of being discriminated against, or of feeling like you even are being judged by other people, whether you are or not, but when you open that whole can of worms inside of yourself, then you do start to not express yourself fully. And I think that is true of so many people with so many different identities, and that could touch on gender, that can touch on people of color's experience. But I don't really specifically speak to their experience, but there's a lot of that kind of stuff. So I feel like in retrospect, I'm more appreciative of that aspect of the show, just like you know, it's like once you start thinking about it in those terms, you're like, it seems more about that, but it wasn't what I set out to do in the first place.
I've often found myself as a writer, and I certainly don't consider myself a consummate writer, but when I am writing pieces, I tend to have my story, my ideas. Well, maybe I'm writing about something else that was kind of underneath that I didn't consciously set out to do, but
Yeah.
it kind of snuck in there. And now as I view it now, I either need to tweak a little bit this way, or sometimes I don't even realize it until maybe I've seen the piece on stage or performed it, or that was a similar experience to you. If you somewhere along the way started realizing, oh, maybe I'm not just talking about we, or maybe in talking to the audience after the show in 2013, and maybe even now revisiting it. Do you have any insights on that?
Well, I think I was shocked by the number of people who said to me, people who I would not have expected to have had similarity in experience, who said, oh, you have no idea. I totally understand everything you said. And, some of these people were men that I just thought, well, they're not going to understand. I mean, they haven't experienced any of this kind of thing. And so, yeah, talking with people afterwards, getting people's feedback really did open up my eyes to how universal this sort of disillusionment and all of the messiness that comes along with it can be for a lot of people. I guess I'm not really surprised, but while you're in the zone of this is my story, you really are focusing on, well, this is about singing. Oh wait, this show isn't about singing at all. Like afterwards you have time to like really think about it and say, oh, this show isn't really about singing at all. So I absolutely agree. You do well, that makes me feel good, because that's what you do with great art, right? You experience it, and then it's more than you thought it would be. So yeah. Thank you for saying my show was a deep and meaningful and has all these layers. I like it. Like, thank you for that review.
Well, I'll stand by it. I'm happy that we have a question from someone who did view the show tonight, and it's an interesting question because I happen to know that you haven't actually performed on stage in a number of years. You did a number of shows with the Savoyards, and you haven't done much performing. I'd like to change that, which I've been trying to do for years, but that's of course your decision. But part of it is, what would lure you back to the stage? And our question from Janet was, what would your dream role be? And I hope maybe would it both be musical and comedic, or what would lure you back to sharing your talent with the world?
Oh, that is a really good question. I haven't thought about it. I mean, the dream show, it actually relates to this, to my performance. This dream Gilbert and Sullivan show, like the main one, right, is Pirates of Penzance, and they did it the year that I did this show, and so I couldn't audition because it would have been too much, and I had to sacrifice that experience for this show. So so that still would be fun. It would be fun to do Pirates someday, if I haven't I do think comedic would be something that would be fun for me. But here's one of the problems that I find in casting myself. That I am a lyric soprano, and I have the body type of like a character like the character type of character who would be a mezzo soprano, if that makes sense. Like, people write certain roles for certain voice types, and that sort of like the funny nanny or the, the housekeeper, or the who does the crazy shenanigans. That type of person is almost always a mezzo. And I don't have the role, I don't have the range, the low range to make that believable. So yeah, I have to think about that dream role. That's a good question. Very good question, but I don't have it off my head.
Well, that actually segues into one of our other discussions that we're going to have around this particular piece. On June 12th, we'll be doing a video discussion after Finding My Voice, and we'll be talking about casting with a panel of experts from the area. I'll be again moderating. I'll be talking with Eric Mitchko from North Carolina Opera. I'll be talking with Angela Santucci, one of the most sought after music directors in this area. And I'll also be talking with Johanna Maynard Edwards from the Women's Theater Festival. And we'll be talking about casting and how hopefully casting is evolving over time so that we aren't just pigeonholing people into particular roles. How can we open up our casting with colorblind casting, rainbow casting, non-traditional casting, and even in ways that we don't have, and certainly that I don't have the vocabulary to talk about right now. What ways are we succeeding, and what ways we have a long way to go, and how can we do that? And I'm very curious to hear what they have to say, and hopefully that will help solve some of the issues that you've dealt with trying to come up and trying to break through in this kind of world, because there's been so much casting that was just stereotypical casting right along the way, where you say, well, I can't cast this because this belongs in this box. And so that's something that I'm very hope you'll join us for that. Not just and that of course opens up a whole another can of worms about not just casting in theater world and the film world and that kind of thing, but also in employment period for folks. All of the inequities of the job market that have existed for so many years, especially for women and people of color. And how can we break out of that? And hopefully we'll be able to extrapolate something from what we talk about there to start dealing with the wider world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the opera has a very particular set of circumstances that are difficult. I do have, you can't just cast a woman as a bass. You'd have to rewrite the whole show, and you have to have the resources, I guess, to do that. Also, you could choose repertoire that's new and has different kinds of roles written for different kinds of voices. Those are hard to come by, and no one's ever heard of them, and those aren't the ones that put people into the theater, that attract people. So yeah, so those are definitely issues. I'm curious to hear what kind of solutions the folks from NC Opera propose to those, because I can see how those would be very difficult problems to solve. So
yeah, I certainly don't think that in our forum we'll be able to, but I hope that other folks will join us and will throw questions, comments, and things to chat about into the chat box as you come along, because we want this to be an interactive panel, not we have all the answers and here they are. That's one of the great things I think about our organization is that we certainly don't feel like we know the answers to every social justice question in the world. We really want to listen and learn and be a conduit for the other folks. So that's why we try to bring in other folks and get them to dig in a little bit with us. And we hope to have a really lively conversation.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Looking to see if we have other folks. This will be able to be viewed later. So we hope if you didn't see it live, that you enjoyed Finding My Voice, that you enjoyed our discussion here, and that you will spread the word. We have performances on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the next 2 weeks, and we're trying to do this to get people back into the idea. We're coming back to live theater, so we're doing this at a time. We're doing Friday and Saturdays at 7 and Sundays at 2 for the next 2 weeks. But after that, if you missed the show and you definitely want to see it. Sorry?
Aren't the Sundays at 3?
3. Did I say 2? I'm sorry.
I think so. Just to make sure. Yeah.
It's just getting late. Yes, Sundays at 3. I do want to, yes, get it right, Jerry. But you can find that information out at thejusticetheaterproject.org. And we will also, after the final performance, we will then be able to have this video available on demand. So you can still watch it if you haven't seen it already. But, it's been my pleasure to talk to you, Lee. It always is. And you're a force of nature. And we really appreciate that you not only shared your experiences in the show, but you allowed us to share it with our audiences.
Well, thank you so much. It was like the gift of opening a time capsule and like experiencing it all over again. So I really appreciate it. And this is a wonderful theater. And I'm so glad that it was something that fit so well with what you guys are doing this year.
Thanks. And thanks to Pampila Violet for being our technician tonight. She's dealing with all sorts of lovely internet problems, but she came through with flying colors. We appreciate that. And we appreciate you for being here and for supporting us through this very difficult year. We want you to stick with us through this summer. Help us to talk about our summer camps that we have coming up for our young people. And we hope you join us back for next season, which will start in October. You can find out all that information on thejusticetheaterproject.org, theater with an ER. And we hope to see you again here at Justice. Thanks again, everyone.